Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, this session is on empowering food systems workers and upholding rights through innovation and collaboration. If this is not the session that you want to be in, this is a good time for you to leave. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Such a pleasure to have you all here. I'm Jo Puri. I'm the Associate Vice President of Strategy and Knowledge at IFAD, also lovingly called the International Fund for Agricultural Development, if you don't know it already. It is one of the 3 UN agencies or Rome-based agencies located in Rome. And if you haven't been to us, please do come and visit. We're the smallest in terms of staff size, but we punch above our weight level. We have an overall portfolio of approximately $9.5 billion, and we work with a diverse set of actors, including, as our name suggests, we're a fund, so we work with private sector actors and government actors, as well as other bilaterals and multilateral stakeholders. I'm really pleased to be here because this session speaks to a subject which is very close to my heart and also very close to the heart of my board members. And I also want to acknowledge one of our board members who's here, Ambassador Miguel, who's in the audience from Mexico. And it's really important for us to recognize that the issue of decent work and living income and wages is going to become increasingly important. We know that as populations increase, and by 2050, we will be at $2 billion, 2 billion people more than what we have today, which means that ensuring transformations that we are all arguing about, whether it is climate transformations, whether it is food system transformations, will need to ensure that we are promising decent work and living income and wages to the populations that are being added to our current state. This is key. This is key because in the transformations that we are seeing, we are going to see 4 kinds of things occur in the overall status of employment. One is job creation. There will be new jobs that are created, jobs to service solar panels, jobs to service new transportation lines, which are also energy efficient, jobs to service ecotourism sites. So job creation will occur. Unfortunately, job reduction will also occur. Reduction will occur in coal mines, in assets that are otherwise called stranded because they have very high fuel and mitigation content and greenhouse gas emissions content, right? So job reduction will occur. And there will be job substitution. We will move away from current jobs that are, say, focusing on manual labor on farms to mechanized transformations on our farms and in our agriculture. So substitution will occur and transformation will also occur. We know that we will have to reskill our labor force. All of this while acknowledging that the informal economy in a lot of developing countries is significant. In Kenya, for example, the informal economy is approximately 10 to 12% of the overall GDP. In India, the country that I come from, it's 15% of the GDP. The informal sector, therefore, means that you don't have the kind of rights that, as well as the kind of safeguards that labor should and are entitled to. And it's really our job in the international community to try and ensure that the right kind of safeguards are there as we go through these very challenging times and think about transformations. Still another figure. Currently, 1 in 5 youth are not employed in either education, training, or any kind of employment. That means that when I look at youth unemployment figures, which is currently at 15.6% globally, it adds another 1.5 point to that number so that we know that youth are increasingly facing unemployment, and lack of work, which then ultimately in social fabric terms means that we are encountering a transition in the way we are thinking about work, in the way we are thinking about jobs, and in solutions that we have to think about to reduce congestion on one side and crime on the other. These are the sorts of questions that I'm asking my panel to try and address as we go along. We have a very exciting panel. The way we're going to run the show is we're going to have two videos. One from President Jose Ramos Horta, who's the president of Timor-Leste, and then the other one from Ms. Rima Nanavati, who is the director of Self-Employed Women's Association in India. And after that, we'll come to the more interactive part of our session. And I'll explain that run of show as we go along. But what I do want to do, and what I do want to promise, and I hope I'm not being too ambitious, is I do want interaction with the audience. And so given that we're an intimate group, I'm hoping that we can have a very engaged conversation, which hopefully is challenging one another in a respectful way, but is also asking the tough questions, but providing solutions as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask the organizers to play the first two videos, and then we'll go on to the interaction part. Thanks.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, this is Jose Ramos Horta, President of Timor-Leste, speaking from Dili, Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is one of the food vulnerable countries in the world. We have had experience in trying to tackle the challenges of food security, of food availability, particularly in times of stress. So we fully understand and endorse the key 5 initiatives and the implementation of these, the observation of these 5 in all our national planning and execution would ensure that we can much more effectively guarantee food security, particularly if we able to create synergies in the entire food chain between consumption and production, with international partners across a broad spectrum of the challenges of insurance, food security, predictability in times of such unpredictable weather patterns, when we need ever more synergies of all parties involved to ensure food stocks, food availability, to prevent catastrophes like hunger when natural disasters do occur. In mobilizing national resources, and this is our obligation at national level, we must not only look at the immediate needs of the people. Of course, in times of crisis created by natural disasters, we must feed the people, we must clothe them, we must shelter them, but we must also look at create resilient communities by providing the people, particularly in the fragile rural areas, with the means to create resilience, sustainability, and how to do that. At the national level, official level, mobilize all resources that are necessary, but working in partnership between the government and the banking sector or the international financial groups to provide credits, loans, at extremely soft loans, interest rates, to enable the private sector, the individuals, their families, to be able to be resilient, be self-sufficient, so that they can produce what is enough not only for their very survival, but to guarantee income for them in the long term. I thank you, all of you.
And now Rima.
Namaste. Distinguished sisters and brothers, I'm very thankful to the Decent Work Coalition on Food Systems for inviting me to speak here. Today I speak here on behalf of SEVA's 2.5 million women workers, all economically very active. Out of the 2.5 million members that SEVA has, 54% of our members are active in the food system. They are either women small farmers, family farmers, agriculture workers, food processors, fish vendors, and in the food business as well. The lives of these members are repeatedly hit by the climate crisis. As I speak today, the members are battling severe cyclone, floods, heat wave, and rain. This is directly affecting the food intake and nutrition of women and young girls. Therefore, I think the Decent Work Coalition needs to set up a global platform that brings about decent work in the food system as well as brings access to food and nutrition to these women and girls. Let me tell you that organizing is a key to ensure access to food and nutrition, to ensure decent work to the women workers in the food systems, to ensure better and decent jobs and livelihoods for the youth in the food system as well. We also feel that it is high time that we now look at building an economy of nurturance. This is an economy that nurtures, that provides ample employment opportunities. Our founder, late Ela Bhatt, concept was 100 miles approach. Let the workers, let the producers in this 100 miles radius have access to 6 basic necessities, which is food, clothing, and shelter, access to healthcare, education, and basic financial services. This is possible when you have local decentralized supply chains, and you cut down the distance between the producers and the consumers. Local production and local consumption. In this process, it also helps address the issue of climate, mitigates climate, ensures climate action, and it generates a lot of employment opportunities locally. I'm saying this based on SEVA's past 2 decades of experience of Rudy, our agribusiness initiative that has built an agribusiness supply chain which is owned and managed by the women workers themselves. Rudy procures from the small farmers grades, process, and packages at the processing center and redistributes amongst the rural households. This ensures fair returns to the small farmers. It provides employment opportunities to the landless poor and ensures food security at the household level. During the COVID times, during the climate crisis, Rudy was there at the doorstep ensuring food security to all women and their households. Therefore, this is the 100 miles approach, local production and local consumption. Kamla is our food center. Kamla brings back the forgotten foods back into circulation. We procure millets, we procure staple grains and convert them into different kinds of bakery products, into food products, and it provides employment opportunities, brings back the forgotten foods into cultivation and circulation. This is called an economy of nurturance, an economy that nurtures the environment, an economy that forges partnerships, an economy that incentivizes harvesting water, harvesting staple foods, harvesting soil, and harvesting water, and also it also incentivizes tree plantation rather than cutting trees. Therefore, I think this is a social contract that the Decent Work Coalition needs to strengthen when we talk about women in the informal sector, women workers in the food system, informal sector women workers in the food system, and bringing decent work, dignified work, and self-respect to the workers in the food system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rima and President Jose Ramos Horta. Unfortunately, they couldn't be with us. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to segue very quickly into the interactive part of our discussion today. So the way we're going to run this is that I'm going to ask a question each from each one of the panelists. And I know that you were told that you'll get 5 minutes to speak. I'm going to go off script and ask you to try and keep it to 3.5 minutes so that we have a little bit of time with the audience as well. We have to prepare for the unexpected. This is what climate change and COVID are teaching us. So we'll go with that. And then we'll have, so after the first round of questions and responses, we'll have then questions and discussion with the audience. And of course, I'll ask the panel back again to respond to all your difficult questions. So with that, and I want to take off from where the president and Remy left off, right? And Rima left off. They both spoke about the transitions that we're going to be witnessing in the context of climate. And they also spoke about, and Rima spoke very eloquently about the 6 things that they're guaranteeing in their 100-mile radius to people who are employed in SEVA, which is food, clothing, health, education, finance, and shelter. And she also spoke about local production and local consumption. So really towards an economy of nurture. I think that's what she called it. So what I want to do is to really turn to my panel today to get them to reflect on some of this and also to incorporate some of the other things that we are finding in our own work at IFAD. And this is in the context of inequality. One of the things that we are finding is that women-led households are more than 50% more likely to be food insecure than men-led households. So that's one. Second, that you are likely to find small-scale farmers, they are the ones who produce food, by the way, remember, are more than 50% likely to be food insecure than if they're not small-scale farmers, right? So these are the 2 groups: women, small-scale farmers, less than or equal to approximately 3 to 5 hectares of land. The second thing we are finding is this big rural-urban divide. In rural areas, which is where most of the cultivation is occurring, we're finding that people are far more likely to eat less diversified food and to consume more sugar, strangely, than in urban areas. And so what I want to do is now, with those factoids, turn to my wonderful panel. And first turn to actually Elvis, who I know is joining from the ILO and remotely. And Elvis is the Rural Economy Specialist of Sectoral Policies at the ILO. And ask him to reflect a little bit about what he thought should be the direction of travel in the Food Systems Summit, and whether he thinks that we are making a dent in terms of addressing some of the social challenges that we are witnessing in this space. Elvis, over to you.
Thank you, Joe. As we know, the Food Summit was taking place in the midst of the pandemic. More than the pandemic, of course, had a devastating impact on our world and also on the world of work. More than 100 million more workers have been pushed into poverty, which means 5 years of progress of eradicating working poverty has been lost. Similarly, child labor, despite 20 years of progress in child labor, we see that the number of children has increased by 8.4 million to 160 million worldwide in total, and the exact impact of the pandemic still remains to be seen. And as the world continues to face some crises, our efforts at closing these jobs gaps created by this crisis and also addressing some of the social issues in food system are becoming more difficult. The reality, however, is that many of these jobs in the agri-food sector have been characterized by significant decent work deficits and have been among the most hazardous, poorly paid, and unprotected. Just to give you some examples, agricultural workers face the highest levels of incidence of poverty. 2/3 of those workers classified as extremely poor are in agriculture. In many countries, agricultural workers are excluded from legislation that affords protection to workers in other sectors. So they are often not able to benefit from legislation on minimum wages, paid sick leave, working hours, social protection. Rima spoke about the importance of organizing. When we look at organizing, only 9% belong to a trade union, whereas the average for other sectors is 17.6%. So this makes it very difficult for them to access these basic rights. Occupational safety and health, which is another fundamental area of rights, is another serious challenge. Workplace injuries or poisoning from agrochemicals affects millions of agricultural workers every year, and fatalities as well are among the highest. Again, I mentioned child labor, and actually of 160 million children in child labor, 70% or 112 million are actually in agriculture. Widespread informality, again, Rima spoke about that, self-employment, insecure forms of work, and lack of social protection are important factors that contribute to this gloomy reality. So to ensure the sustainability and resilience of our food systems, the progress is really needed in all 4 areas of the decent work agenda. Decent work agenda is something that ILO, as some of you may know, works. And this is quality jobs and enterprises, guaranteeing rights at work, extending social protection, and promoting social dialogue. And let me briefly go through these areas. Improving productivity, incomes, and working conditions of both wage workers and small-scale farmers is vital. And in addition to investment in infrastructure, education, again, these have been mentioned earlier by Rima, financial services, policy priorities need to focus or include the creation of an enabling environment for sustainable enterprises. The creation of quality of jobs, however, needs to go hand in hand with the promoting respect for rights at work, because the two are inextricably linked. In this regard, the implementation of international labor standards in the agri-food sector must be a priority. This includes strengthening labor laws, labor administration, and labor inspection. And particular attention needs to be paid to fundamental principles and rights at work. We have 5 categories of this core labor standards. So this is the right to organize, the abolition of child labor, the elimination of forced labor and discrimination, and a healthy and a safe work environment. Some of these rights, we call them enabling rights, and they respect for those rights will help to ensure respect for some other rights, including the right to food. There are also some important international labor standards directly relevant to agriculture, such as, for example, Safety and Health in Agriculture Convention. Unfortunately, these standards are among the least ratified ILO conventions. And if we are to ensure equitable livelihoods, this would need to change. The crisis has also highlighted the importance of social protection. Today in the world, 4 billion people lack any form of social protection. Unfortunately, again, agricultural workers are among those that are disproportionately affected by this phenomenon. Accelerating progress towards universal social protection, therefore, needs to be a priority. We have all been working on all of these issues. As I said, we face now greater problems due to recurrent crises. And of course, you know, given the sizable challenges at hand, we strongly believe that building partnerships, building collaborations, bringing to the table our expertise, in other words, contributing in accordance with our expertise and value added, we believe this is key really to move forward in addressing some of these important challenges in the agri-food sector. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Elvis. That was very useful, and especially some of the figures that you presented on child labor as well as on agricultural labor, and that 2/3 of the extreme poor are to be found in the agriculture sector, were quite sobering. I also thought that you calling to arms and really thinking about what we should be doing in terms of enforcing a lot of the standards that I know ILO has been in the lead of is really important. So just to say, ladies and gentlemen, that the Decent Work and Living Income and Wages Coalition is being co-led by ILO and by IFAD. And for IFAD, I do want to point out and shout out to Mr. Juan Carlos Mendoza, who's a colleague of mine sitting in the front row, and please go and surround him after the session for all your difficult questions, to then see as to how this coalition is going forward. And we're also collaborating with CARE. So now I want to turn to Ms. I beg your pardon, Dr. Maria Gutierrez, who's the Director General of Agriculture for the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries in Timor-Leste. And Dr. Gutierrez, if I might, could you provide some insights on the decent work challenges and opportunities faced in Timor-Leste? What kind of commitments are you making? And what is the progress that you see going forward? So you have 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. Because of the time, I think I'll just go through the answer. There are challenges and opportunity and commitment. I think the main challenge of Timor-Leste in terms of development agriculture related to the labor, we're facing the problem of informal empowerment, low skill level of our farmers, gender inequality, and also a weak of the social protection. In terms of facing these challenges, there are opportunities in agriculture sector. These opportunities lying in agriculture development education and skill enhance and promoting gender equality for more inclusive and sustainable growth. In Timor-Leste, particularly the high percentage of unemployment is more for our youth people. In Timor-Leste population is only 1.3 million, but 40% of them are youth. That is why the government, also the commitments of government to include the establishment of vocational training in agriculture, because in Timor-Leste we have the government school, I think three agriculture school, which is in agriculture and also in livestock, and also some in private school, which is led by some church that we have one school that's only related for livestock development. But in terms of on how we can develop the agriculture and also empower the people working in the agriculture sector, We also involve the strengthening to enhance awareness, advocating people by providing training to our youth people as well as to the farmers. And also in terms of gender inequality in agriculture sector, we have gender policy, which is provide more opportunity to gender. They have more right to make decision in terms of identify what kind of activity they are going to work in agriculture sector, as well as they have rights for the land. This is why the gender policy is working. But as you say that the level of education of our people is very low. So we do some approach to them on how to make sure that they also have rights to make some decision in terms of developing agriculture, start from small scale, from the scale up to within the family, and also some farmers association that they can work together in terms of getting some income generation from their daily activities. So the commitment of the government is to strengthening, to make sure as well as to motivating our young generation, involving them in the agriculture sector. I can give an example that every year we send some youth people to have a training, whether in Indonesia or work with some UN agency to send them outside for 6 months, for a year. And once they come back to Timor, then we have to reintegrate them in the agriculture sector. Within the government, we will provide some public transparency, like we provide like 5,000, 2,000 to each of group. So we accompany them in order to develop them in agriculture. We link them with some entrepreneur, they produce and then they can sell it. Also, our policy in Timor-Leste regarding to the food production and food system, the government is committed to promote more local food, which is for our school feeding program. The regulation is the more focusing on local food, to provide purchase local food for the school feeding program, which is we can a little bit improve the life of our farmers in the local area. So I think this for a moment I can answer the question. Even we have some more discussion, then we can provide more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gutierrez. That was very eloquent. Clearly, you have a big challenge. 40% of your population is young, low levels of education, and you're looking at employment, awareness creation, land rights, and training, as well as government transfers. Given that, I'm going to move to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you are the youth representative, stakeholder engagement and networking advisory group of the UN Food Systems Summit. How does do the remarks that both Elvis and Dr. Gutierrez have presented link with your passion for empowering youth and supporting decent work for youth in the food system transformation? Specifically, can you talk about the challenges of marginalized groups and some of the solutions that you think are game-changing? Over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. And indeed, I must note that I'm very impressed by the remarks that have come before me, particularly on education and skill enhancement, and also the training of youth in agriculture, because we realize that the youths do have great ideas sometimes, I mean, most times, but we lack the technical expertise on how to go about things. So that is where capacity building comes in. And when we hear that certain governments are making commitments to train and enhance our skills, it's very encouraging, because this is something that will then enable us to create jobs, which is one of the strategies that can be used to promote decent work. So my other remarks would be on policy. Yes, she has also mentioned policy in food systems, which should be geared towards promoting the youth in agriculture. Because a lot of policies are so constrained. It needs to be opened up to enable us to produce food and also engage in agribusiness. For example, I would note on value addition and agro-processing, which will also be used to help these countries to manage the problems of food waste and food loss, because we realize globally we are losing about a third of the food that we are producing. So the youth can come in as a solution through the agro-processing and value addition of the different types of foods that we are producing. So how we can further look into bringing together the marginalized groups and having them as part of the conversation, and the game-changing actions that I can highlight that I've seen in the last 2 years since we had the previous summit in 2021. Okay, for one, some youths have had their own initiatives and actions at the grassroots level. And some of you may have had an opportunity to visit our exhibition booth, because we have been highlighting these actions since the first day. And in case you haven't had a chance, please do pay us a visit. We want you to engage with us and also see how we can collaborate further on our own actions. Because we are looking forward to scaling up these efforts through maybe technical and financial support, and also supporting us. We are having a proposed youth coalition, which will then now support the realization of the food systems transformation through the national conveners and other stakeholders as well, because we want to work collectively with other stakeholders. I also recognize the efforts that have been ongoing the last 2 years from development partners and also the UN. I realize a lot of organizations have these challenges and competitions aimed at the youth in agriculture, such that if you have a great idea, you can be trained on business development on it and how to scale it up to the next level. So these have been some nice things we have come to see. But then again, we still need to scale up these efforts, because we realize only just a few organizations have them. And also they have these challenges only just maybe once a year, and then it's over. We need to look at how can we reach out to the other youths, especially in the marginalized and rural areas, in the rural communities. And so we would then be looking at promoting youth employment and supporting small businesses, and also foster innovation among the youth, which will then catapult into some very good small businesses that will employ more youths and more people around our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Very useful. One of the things that IFAD is doing is also building agribusinesses, which is really to encourage small and medium enterprise development by young people located in rural areas, training them for either setting up enterprises or be employed by formal private sector actors. And this takes me to last, but definitely not the least, member of this panel, who is Mr. Barry Martin, who is a member of the managing board of Rabobank. And you're a very important part of the jigsaw puzzle. You represent the entire private sector for us. You realize that. So you're like Atlas with the load of the world on your shoulders. And I was wondering whether you could reflect a little bit on what is required from the private sector to show leadership in this space. Specifically, we're seeing a lot of these training, capacity building initiatives that are going on that can help youth, but that's the supply side. The demand side has to be the private sector, that they are truly asking for these, newly trained young people to be coming and joining their ranks. What are some of the challenges and what are some of the initiatives that you think have worked, and where can we help? Where can the international community help, and what sort of innovations would you like to see? Sorry, that's a lot of questions, but pick anyone.
And you give me 3.5 minutes, so but that's okay. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a very important topic, especially because when we talk about feeding the world, we cannot feed the world without having smallholder farmers and the youth and women working on the land. So let me first start going to Rabobank, because we are a cooperative. lot of people don't realize that Rabobank actually started 125 years ago at the end of the 19th centuries, when actually Europe was in a very dire strait. And a lot of farmers at that time, and as you see, I have blue eyes, started to emigrate out of Europe because they just couldn't make their living there. And Rabobank actually comes from that movement that happened in that period in Europe, and especially in the Netherlands, and was created the cooperative bank. So Rabobank, up to date, we are actually an organization founded by farmers. So that's why we are today, and we committed ourselves to this global food and agri responsibility that we feel as an organization. The issue of smallholder farmers outside of the Netherlands is already something that we have been working on since 45 years ago. So we have every year invested a big portion of our net profits in sense of trying to develop cooperative systems in Africa specifically. So today we reach almost today we are reaching 3 million smallholder farmers as we speak. However, what we have noticed in all those years that we have been working is it only works when you have an approach of an ecosystem. And what we have seen in all those years is that a lot of organizations from governmental, but also foundations, private, they do their thing, but we never actually make it together. Because when we talk about fair pay, that's one thing, but livelihood is actually what we're talking about, right? So how can we make it a good living for the people on the land, and then make them decent living, and actually more than that, how to make it an interesting living on the land. And you only will be able to do that if you create an ecosystem. And that's the first thing. But in that ecosystem, when you create that, you also have to think about where are you going to sell your product. So then you talk about the value chain. I think that's what you were referring to, right? And that's where we are really very triggered how difficult it has been. And that's why I'm really asking, I will need help, is how can we actually make sure that every time when we talk about the ecosystem, we just not talk about, okay, health, about education, but we also have access to the markets, right? So we have been experimenting on that, and I will talk a little bit about that later. The other thing that we have noticed in creating the ecosystem is that the last mile is very expensive. And the only way of doing the last mile more and more is becoming clear that you need to do that through digitalization and using social media and digital activities. So without that, you will not get there. And the last part that we are really struggling with as a bank, and I will be very honest, is that when you talk about ESG, the S of ESG has absolutely not been defined. And as a financial institution, you need to have things defined to be able to know what you're going to do. And if it's not defined, you struggle. So if we don't define what is actually S, what is actually the value of S, we struggle. Today and in the last 3 days, I've heard many times your leaders, the leaders of countries, the leaders of UN, and also some other actors saying, and even the IFAD president saying there is a hidden cost of 12 trillion. If that's so, then let's measure that 12 trillion, because then as a hidden value needs to become apparent value. So let's measure that, right? So that's why I'm really very much of a believer that we need to make sure that we understand we're never going to get to the livelihood or the true value, and that we need to do it through the true value. What is actually the true value of the things? Today, and I want to talk about S, we buy things without paying the fair pay of livelihood of the products that we buy. And it's just a question. And that's why I come then to some of the initiatives which I think are extremely important. We have been testing with some of your organization, but also very profoundly about what we call the Farm to Market Alliance, is where we have been trying to first find a product, a way of selling a product, and then working the value chain backwards, right? And with the urbanization that we are seeing right now in Africa and in Southeast Asia, that should be the way to go to, right? So if you want to be local, first find how to sell your product. Otherwise, you're going to produce you don't know. And the reason why I'm saying that is that, yes, the financial sector as a commercial sector, banking sector, has been criticized, right? And I think rightly also, but I can also criticize back. Because for us as a bank, if you don't generate cash flow to repay the loan, And then you have an issue, because then it doesn't become a financing, then it becomes a donation, right? So we have to be very careful about that, right? So the only way of having a system that works is that you have a strong value chain, that you have the money flowing. And therefore, I think digitalization is going to be a very important aspect of that. And then we come to the last part of what I think is very important. If you talk about value chain, if you talk about ecosystems, the thing that happens is that a lot of data is going to be generated. And once you have data, and when you share data, because I think the issue is that legislation of sharing data is very weak with privacy, et cetera, right? Identification. When you share data, you can analyze much better the risks that you are taking and where are the weaknesses and where are the gaps. So if I would say one of the very important things that we should be talking when we talk about empowerment of youth, empowerment of gender, is how can we generate those data so that we can see the gaps, so that we can quickly have the right interventions? How can we share this data so that we can make sure that we bring the right partners to create that ecosystem? I really, as I said, I really think that the commitment that we should all remain is that, yes, not only we should feed 10 billion people, but we should feed 10 people fairly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barry. You definitely did justice to the 5 minutes that I gave. I'm teasing. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, again, I'm going to open this up actually. According to my instructions from the organizers, I'm supposed to go back to the panelists, but I realize I've done an awful job of basically trying to ensure that we finished the spoken part from the panelists at least 10 minutes ago. So what I'm going to do is to open this up to the audience, because really you're the people that I serve, and see if you've got questions and or content that you'd like to share with us. I'm going to try and ask you to please be pithy. Pithy is very important. So please be brief, introduce yourselves, and kindly ask a question or a brief comment. 3 sentences if it's a comment or a question. Be brave. The ladies here. So the one at the back and then in front. Go for it. Let the mic come.
You. I'm Andrea Westman, Food Transition Lead at Impact Institute. I was wondering, I thought it was interesting that you said that the S was not defined. I think it is partly defined. For instance, the United Nations Guidelines on Business and Human Rights, we kind of know what to do. And I was wondering, we're talking a lot about farmers and what your perspective is on workers further up in the value chain. So factory workers and workers that are producing our food further up.
Thank you. So we'll take a few questions.
My name is Jacobine Manak. I work at DSM Firmenich, a global food and feed ingredients industry. My question builds on earlier discussions a couple of days that we should have aligned framework with looking at multiple facets, public health, climate, nature, as well as livelihoods. And what's intriguing me and our partners and the company, how can we specifically look at that equity and livelihoods? We don't have science-based targets yet or so, as for climate, but we would love to do so as we gear up all our innovations and partnerships for those better outcomes. So the precise question, a living income for farmers and other workers, how can we get aligned definition and metrics?
Great question. One more for this round. Molly?
Hi, Molly Brennan from IFAD. So I know recently the ILO has agreed on some guidelines on decent work for agri-food systems workers. So I'd be really interested to hear from Elvis particularly on what can stakeholders in this room do to make sure that these guidelines can be widely used by governments and other actors in the food system. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Molly. So what I'm going to do is see if my panelists want to do a 1-minute intervention, the ones that are with me, and then I'll go to Elvis. Barry, go for it. If you want. Yeah, you were the last time, so.
All right, so I think the big issue is if you want to because the question was also to me then I think is about the financing, right? So let's focus on what enabling factor I can put on the table. I cannot produce food, right? So the issue that we are having right now is are we actually aligned in what the definitions are of the things that we are creating? So there are four definitions that are very fuzzy to me, very honestly. The first one is, what is the definition of a carbon? What is the definition of biodiversity? What is the definition, and that's why I called about social. And what's actually the definition of water? Because if we are going to make sure that we are going as a financial sector, as a private sector, going to be judged, right, by how well we actually managed, and then you go to the equity that Jacqueline, you are referring to. I think we should understand better how that comes together. And I'm being very honest to that. I could walk around here in this building today and ask everybody that is in panels, and everybody is going to go different answer for all of the 4 elements that I just mentioned today. I can even go so far is that the commitments that the companies and the financial sector is giving out there, like the net zero banking definitions, etc., are different than the definitions that we have been giving for the pathways of the country pathways. So what's happening right now, and sorry that I'm being a bit critical, and I know it's not directly the youth, I know the youth is not, is that our industry is saying, what are we talking about? Sorry, but we are doing stuff. I'm not saying that we're not doing stuff, we are moving forward, but as we move forward, as you want to really have much more funds coming into the system, investors by equity investors, financiers, etc., we need to make sure that we understand what we are talking about. And now that's to us, but that doesn't take away my responsibility that every day I need to get it better.
Thank you, Barry. Elizabeth?
Yes, so I would be responding on how to align what we're doing to climate, the discourse in climate action. One word that came to my mind immediately I heard you talk was on circularity of our actions. We're talking about decent jobs, we're talking about work, the work we are doing within the agricultural sector. How can we ensure that our actions are aligning to the fact that we do not want food waste that is now going to bring in more GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions? Well, I would look at it this way: whatever we are engaged in, whether it's our production processes, how can we use the waste alongside this process to bring in the aspect of a circular economy, such that we are not just producing things and leaving the process halfway. We need to go beyond what we are producing and using the waste that is generated to create, you're even creating more employment. We're not only looking at a reduction of the GHG, but you're also creating new jobs by coming up with these production processes after the waste. Yeah, so that's my thought around it.
Thank you very much. Doctor?
Yes, thank you. I think related to the question, aligned framework, climate change and things, as people who working in production, more in production and agriculture sector, considering the finance sector that also contribute to the agricultural development, I think the most important is the measuring the impact, because we can see in everywhere, once we have the project, we didn't identify what are the priorities. Now we see climate fund, everything is related to the climate change. We got a lot of funding for that, but if we cannot give the prioritization for what's the nation needs, that's that will be wasting, I'm saying.
Yeah.
But the most important is how the nation can identify what are the priorities, what are the challenges. Now we talk about the impact of climate change in Timor-Leste. We have this unexpected flooding, drought, and things. But if we identify things, then you go to the funding body. We ask the support funding for them. But after years, we can bring the measure of the impact. What are the impact from the budget that is supporting Timor-Leste, for example? That's the main important thing. We have to bring the impact measuring to our donators. That's the, yes, because this is a big responsibility for us.
I agree. I agree. What you measure is what you manage.
Yeah.
Elvis, I'm going to give you the last word, but only for 35 seconds.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I'll be very fast. So that the guidelines were adopted last May. We had close to 100 experts, global experts on decent work issues who gathered at the ILO. I spent a week looking at this draft. So it is, the first document of its kind as it covers all the international labor standards related to the agri-food sector. There are some 50 ILO conventions and recommendations, and this document, which is 44 pages long, draws on the information contained in all these standards. I kind of agree that perhaps, I'm not an expert on environment, but from the social perspective, it is clear what needs to be done. The UN Guiding Principles on Business Human Rights state clearly what needs to be done. These guidelines will actually help member states and also companies to understand what needs to be done specifically in the agri-food sector. So in terms of the next steps, we will be developing training materials, conducting capacity building programs for member states. We hope that not only governments, but also, other partners will find the guidelines useful, in particular the private sector, especially as many of the employers facing the challenge of demonstrating that they respect human rights in their operations. So I think, that the private sector will also find it very useful. So I'll stop here, but, you can find the guidelines online, and we're happy to support you in any way you would find it useful.
Okay, thank you, Elvis. I want to thank Elvis, Elizabeth, Barry, and Dr. Gutierrez. Thank you very much, as well as the audience. And I want to close by saying, I think what we are hearing is that clearly for the international community, and that's who I represent, the responsibility is to translate a lot of the ambition that we are witnessing in the international space into standards, into understanding what this means for E, for S, for G. Because unless we do that, we can't have the likes of Barry essentially coming and saying, yes, we are meeting those standards. So that's our first responsibility. And second is really understanding what is the ambition of the international community. But I think unless we measure, we don't manage. And that is, for me, the next step. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Look forward to seeing you again.